Third thesis, movement and change. And this is Bergson's third thesis, which is also contained in creative evolution. If we tried to reduce it to a bare formula, it would be this: not only is the instant an immobile section of movement, but movement is a mobile section of duration, that is, of the whole, or of a whole, which implies that movement expresses something more profound, which is the change in duration or in the whole. To say that duration is change is part of its definition. It changes and does not stop changing. For example, matter moves, but does not change. Now movement expresses a change in duration or in the whole. What is a problem is on the one hand this expression, and on the other, this whole duration identification. Movement is a translation in space. Now each time there is a translation of parts in space, there is also a qualitative change in a whole. Bergson gave numerous examples of this in Matter and Memory. An animal moves, but this is for a purpose: to feed, migrate, etc. It might be said that movement presupposes a difference of potential, and aims to fill it. If I consider parts or places abstractly, A and B, I cannot understand the movement which goes from one to the other. But imagine I am starving at A, and at B there is something to eat. When I have reached B and had something to eat, what has changed is not only my state, but the state of the whole which encompassed B, A, and all that was between them. When Achilles overtakes the tortoise, what changes is the state of the whole which encompassed the tortoise, Achilles, and the distance between the two. Movement always relates to a change, migration to a seasonal variation, and this is equally true of bodies. The fall of a body presupposes another one which attracts it, and expresses a change in the whole which encompasses them both. If we think of pure atoms, their movements, which testify to a reciprocal action of all the parts of the substance, necessarily express modifications, disturbances, changes of energy in the whole. What Bergson discovers beyond translation is vibration, radiation. Our error lies in believing that it is the any element whatever's external to qualities which move, but the qualities themselves are pure vibrations which change at the same time as the alleged elements move. In creative evolution, Bergson gives an example which is so famous that it no longer surprises us. Putting some sugar in a glass of water, he says that I must, willingly, wait until the sugar melts. And this is slightly strange, since Bergson seems to have forgotten that stirring with a spoon can help it to dissolve. But what is his main point? That the movement of translation which detaches the sugar particles and suspends them in the water itself expresses a change in the whole, that is, in the content of the glass, a qualitative transition from water which contains a sugar lump to the state of sugared water. If I stir with the spoon, I speed up the movement, but I also change the whole, which now encompasses the spoon, and the accelerated movement continues to express the change of the whole. The wholly superficial displacements of masses and molecules studied in physics and chemistry would become, by relation to that inner viral movement, which is transformation and not translation, what the position of a moving object is to the movement of that object in space. 12. Thus, in his third thesis, Bergson puts forward the following analogy. Immobile sections, in relation to movement, equals movement as mobile section, in relation to qualitative change. The only difference is this: the ratio on the left-hand side expresses an illusion, and that on the right-hand side, a reality. Above all, what Bergson wants to say using the glass of sugared water is that my waiting, whatever it be, expresses a duration as mental, spiritual reality. But why does this spiritual duration bear witness, not only for me who waits, but for a whole which changes? According to Bergson, the whole is neither given nor givable, and the error of modern science, like that of ancient science, lay in taking the whole as given, in two different ways. Many philosophers had already said that the whole was neither given nor givable. They simply concluded from this that the whole was a meaningless notion. Bergson's conclusion is very different. If the whole is not givable, it is because it is the open, and because its nature is to change constantly, or to give rise to something new, in short, to endure. The duration of the universe must therefore be one with the latitude of creation which can find place in it, so that each time we find ourselves confronted with a duration, or in a duration, we may conclude that there exists somewhere a whole which is changing, and which is open somewhere. It is widely known that Bergson initially discovered duration as identical to consciousness. But further study of consciousness led him to demonstrate that it only existed in so far as it opened itself upon a whole, by coinciding with the opening up of a whole. Similarly for the living being, in comparing the living being to a whole, or to the whole of the universe, Bergson seems to be reviving the most ancient simile. However, he completely reverses its terms. For, if the living being is a whole and, therefore, comparable to the whole of the universe, this is not because it is a microcosm as closed as the whole is assumed to be, but, on the contrary, because it is open upon a world, and the world, the universe, is itself the open. Wherever anything lives, there is, open somewhere, a register in which time is being inscribed. If one had to define the whole, it would be defined by relation. Relation is not a property of objects, it is always external to its terms. It is also inseparable from the open, and displays a spiritual or mental existence. Relations do not belong to objects, but to the whole, on condition that this is not confused with a closed set of objects. By movement in space, the objects of a set change their respective positions. But, through relations, the whole is transformed or changes qualitatively. We can say of duration itself or of time, that it is the whole of relations. The whole and the wholes must not be confused with sets. Sets are closed, and everything which is closed is artificially closed. Sets are always sets of parts. But a whole is not closed, it is open, and it has no parts except in a very special sense, since it cannot be divided without changing qualitatively at each stage of the division. The real whole might well be, we conceive, an indivisible continuity. The whole is not a closed set, but on the contrary that by virtue of which the set is never absolutely closed, never completely sheltered, that which keeps it open somewhere as if by the finest thread which attaches it to the rest of the universe. The glass of water is indeed a closed set containing the parts, the water, the sugar, perhaps the spoon, but that is not the whole. The whole creates itself, and constantly creates itself in another dimension without parts, like that which carries along the set of one qualitative state to another, like the pure ceaseless becoming which passes through these states. It is in this sense that it is spiritual or mental. The glass of water, the sugar, and the process of the sugars melting in the water are abstractions, and the whole within which they have been cut out by my senses and understanding progresses, it may be, in the manner of a consciousness. In any case, this artificial division of a set or a closed system is not a pure illusion. It is well founded and, if it is impossible to break the thin link of each thing with the whole, this paradoxical link, which ties it to the open, it can at least be drawn out, stretched to infinity, made finer and finer. The organization of matter makes possible the closed systems or the determinate sets of parts, and the deployment of space makes them necessary. But the point is that the sets are in space, and the wholes are in duration, are duration itself, insofar as it does not stop changing. So that the two formulas which corresponded to Bergson's first thesis now take on a much more rigorous status. Immobile sections and abstract time refers to closed sets whose parts are in fact immobile sections, and whose successive states are calculated on an abstract time, while real movement, concrete duration refers to the opening up of a whole which endures, and whose movements are so many mobile sections crossing the closed systems. The upshot of this third thesis is that we find ourselves on three levels: I, the sets or closed systems which are defined by discernible objects or distinct parts; 2, the movement of translation which is established between these objects and modifies their respective positions; 3, the duration or the whole, a spiritual reality which constantly changes according to its own relations. Thus in a sense movement has two aspects. On one hand, that which happens between objects or parts, on the other hand that which expresses the duration or the whole. The result is that duration, by changing qualitatively, is divided up in objects, and objects, by gaining depth, by losing their contours, are united in duration. We can therefore say that movement relates the objects of a closed system to open duration, and duration to the objects of the system which it forces to open up. Movement relates the objects between which it is established to the changing whole which it expresses, and vice versa. Through movement the whole is divided up into objects, and objects are reunited in the whole, and indeed between the two the whole changes. We can consider the objects or parts of a set as immobile sections, but movement is established between these sections, and relates the objects or parts to the duration of a whole which changes, and thus expresses the changing of the whole in relation to the objects and is itself a mobile section of duration. Now we are equipped to understand the profound thesis of the first chapter of Matter and Memory. 1. There are not only instantaneous images, that is, immobile sections of movement. 2. There are movement images which are mobile sections of duration. 3. There are, finally, time images, that is, duration images, change images, relation images, volume images which are beyond movement itself.